Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this legal compliance session on the protected workers and mandatory vaccination policy position announced by Daniel Andrews on Friday last week. This is the last session that we are running of this particular group of sessions. The previous two covered off some of the key legal requirements for your agencies. We've looked at the workforce requirements. We've looked at who this covers. And yesterday we looked at the specific requirements for authorized service providers and looking at broadening that scope out in terms of legal letters that you needed to notify certain service providers about. We're going to recap today's session to cover off where we've come and what we've discussed as well too. But what I am actually going to show you also is some of the tools other agencies are using to capture some of their staff information around things like survey tools, mandatory policies, and other sort of checklists that people are using that are helping them in terms of going through their compliance obligations. So with it, as I've mentioned before, Friday, 1st of October, Daniel Andrews announced the vaccination is required to protect workers and Victoria, and a new policy position was announced. That said, what we are going to look at is some of the checklist tools in terms, and we will be releasing these with your permission on your GEMBA dashboard to allow you to conduct some of your compliance checks and also gather the information that you need as well too. That said, as I've mentioned, we have looked at workplace policies to address mandatory vaccination requirements. We've also looked at HR and vaccination registers. We've looked at some of the contracts and supplier arrangements, which I will cover off. And also I'm going to mention around today, updating your organizational risk register. Of course, if there are questions that you have around this, by all means, just reach out to me on the mobile. All of you have access to my mobile number directly, or of course, our GEMBA support desk for some of the more general questions on the 1300 number listed on your screen. So essentially, the rules that we've had for a couple of people that are just joining us for the first time today in Melbourne and regional Victoria, authorised worker list will those on the authorised worker list will be required to have their first COVID vaccine dose by the Friday, the 15th of October, in order to continue to work on site. And they will be needed to be fully vaccinated by the 26th of November. So the 15th of October deadline will not apply to workers who already have existing requirements by the Chief Health Officer, and groups like that include construction, freight, healthcare, aged care, who've recently gone through this, and education will still need to comply with the recent advice. So we have looked at the authorised workers list on Friday. Yesterday, we went through the authorised providers list and looked at who is covered within those specific groups, and also from your own agency point of view, the need to update your relevant COVID plans and also risk registers as well. As I've mentioned previously, this is in alignment with the roadmaps, specifically here in Victoria, and what the plan is to try and reach the 80% goal mark. Now, with it, what I will just jump into is some of the policies and checklist tools. Essentially, what we've got for you, which again, we will actually send out to everyone after today's session. Let me just bring this up. We do have a series of checklist tools, one of which is quite simply a Word document. We do have this as the GEMBA form as well too, which will be made available to you. Essentially what we've got here is the compliance tool. I'll just make this slightly bigger for us to view, but this really will summarize, and we removed all the specific legislative requirements out of this as well. Let me just bring this up here. Here it is here. But essentially what we've got is the 6 areas for yourselves to look at around this. We do have the specific legislation from a legal update point of view of what it covers, so that way you've got those details as well too within the Gemma form. This Word document is really there almost as literally a checklist tool for you to use. So what agencies have done, and this session was just to cover off some of the key areas of how agencies have actually started to meet their compliance obligations that were announced on Friday last week. So the first thing that people actually looked at was a vaccination survey. And the idea of this was to cover very quickly staff, volunteers, and contractors that your agency uses. And there are some agencies based out in Geelong, Shepparton, and the lights that have rolling lockdowns over the past few weeks. And essentially, these survey tools look something like this. And I'll show you how effective some of these are. Again, we can make these available on your dashboard. But essentially what this has done, to show you what they've used it for, and here it is here, is it is a Gemba form. You can download these, but quite simply what it shows you is, and this is one of the ones that an agency has used, we've adjusted it to hide their details. But essentially it asks a series of questions. Quite simply, have you had the vaccine? If no to the above, do you intend to have the vaccine? And any comments that they have. Idea was to try and capture this information very, very quickly. Other agencies have also added in further information around whether they've had the first or second, and also clearly if they've been able to actually update this document itself, and I'll just bring it back here. Then essentially what obviously people can do from here is to view the data set, and let me just answer no to these as well too, and save the form. Here it is here. And what it does obviously allow me to do is to then update this information directly. Now, one of the things that we're just showing you around this is quite simply, if people need to then update this and said, yes, they have done it. And of course, if they want to add the evidence in, which a number of agencies have used as part of their survey tool, and you can actually ask this information from your staff or volunteers as well, then again, they can actually load copies of their MyGov certificate into their survey tool as well. Now, again, why we're actually showing you this is to really show you how simple some of this stuff can actually be for people to actually use their information that they want to show people and start to collect this information as well. The other parts that we've also covered off was around the mandatory vaccination policies, and we've circulated templates of those as well too. Again, these mandatory vaccination policies, if I bring those up, was covered in the previous session as well. And with this, the vaccination policy covered off the specific requirements that we've seen coming out of the here we are here. Let me just bring this up for you as well too, of what actually was announced last week as well. And again, what we've seen from agencies in terms of information that people actually do need to hold on to, and also what agencies may need to have in place as well. We have set this up so this way, depending on your agency, you can also use this. Policy document within your agency as well too. But again, the idea is that it will actually give you a baseline to actually start with for your agency as well. And let me just bring this up for you to have a look at. Here it is here. So within this, again, the sample mandatory vaccination policy covers off the requirements. It covers off who it was issued by as well too, as well as things like HR registers and information. If you decide to collect information about your volunteers or staff, which I'll show you as well, and also if there are non-exempt employees or exempt employees, as well as proof of vaccinations, and also other compliance reviews on things like medical grounds, religious beliefs, etc. And again, this is a policy template that allows you to actually take this information and very quickly load this into your agency's policy registers should you require it as well. The other parts that we've also covered off from a checklist point of view was around the identified authorized providers. And again, we've covered those off specifically around information that not only from your own personnel that you need to look at, but also agencies that might provide your security, cleaning, and of course, agencies that you work in partnership with as well too. The other ones was around the update of the HR and vaccination registers. Now here, this is a case where when you go into your GEMBA dashboard, from an operational point of view, some of the stuff that you're starting to now look at within your agencies, from running the mandatory vaccinations and surveys of information that you have, is to actually look at, well, who and what information do I actually need to cover? If people are exempt, for example, because they've got a medical condition, because they've got a, if there are some other protected characteristic, for example, listed items include because they're pregnant, because they have a disability, or for other religious beliefs, then again, that information does need to be recorded somewhere. And reason that we say it needs to be recorded is because you're trying to provide a safe work environment for people that may be unvaccinated within your workplace. So again, in what we've had here, agencies have started to utilize the HR module space as well too. And essentially what they've loaded it in is to actually have things like vaccine card information that they've placed in, and I can simply click on this and update this information. Or if I have an exemption, it might be medical, and that way I can then load in a specific attachment to it. Now, what we've also put in, and I had a conversation with an HR manager who sits within the people and culture team from an agency, they compared this in some ways to what we're seeing with working with children checks or police checks. And in some ways that is correct. So where you need to have reminders around things like they're talking of booster shots and the likes, well, then what we've got here is essentially where you can actually add in the information around your vaccination details for staff. And you've got the issued and expiry dates where they need to do it. Now, the reason that we have this going into this particular form is to look at, well, how do you actually run these reports from a compliance point of view? So a lot of what I'm talking about now is stuff you already have on your GEMBA dashboard. It is there to make your compliance job easier. And we're seeing agencies already since since Friday last week, start to put these into place already. Agencies that might have worked in the aged care space or hotel quarantine space that use GEMBA, again, are already using these systems, and we're seeing that they're working. So what we have here is updating the HR and vaccination registers. The other two things that we're covering off also is around your organizational risk register. Now, your organizational risk register, again, we've got entries on here to in fact identify the risks that your agency has. And when we click on the risk register, you can see that I've loaded in, as part of this, vaccination of staff. And with this, since Friday, it was marked as an extreme entry. Because of the checklist that we've just walked you through, we can now go through and actually reduce this to a low part, and also mark what's been done. And we've conducted a survey, and let's say, and completed the vaccine profile for all staff and volunteers. Oops, and I'll just make sure I spell this correctly, across our agency. Now, this is the one part that we've got as well too, and now I've got my risk register updated as well. So part of these legal updates that we're running is to really give you the hands-on stuff of how you can actually utilize also GEMBA to manage your risks around this. You might already have other systems in there, but essentially I'm just showing you how we actually run this as well too. Now, one of the things that is coming up, and we are going to be giving you a separate legal update around this, is on policy for client visits. Now, this is something that agencies have started to raise with us. They're asking questions on, what happens if a client is unvaccinated or a staff member is unvaccinated, and you have a mix of either. What do we do? How are we actually managing this? Because that doesn't seem to be clear from obviously Friday's announcement. There is some works that we're actually unpacking with that with agencies, but stay tuned. I've put that onto this checklist tool because we will provide a position statement around that over the next few days as well to support yourselves as well. So essentially, going back to our presentation and covering these off from what we can see, we've gone through the legal documents around this. Oops, wrong way. We've covered off the things like the sample mandatory vaccination policy, which you all have access to. We've looked at some of the key factors in drafting a vaccination policy. We've looked at on Friday also things like the staff legal contracts and policy documents around current staff and future staff and things that you need to be aware about. We've also looked at your supply chain agreements yesterday and also things like you need to consider for moving forward, such as pandemic clauses and insurance requirements as well. As we flagged yesterday, letters should be going out to agencies. We can assist you with that, which I will give people a call this afternoon just to discuss this further with them. But essentially what we are advising agencies to do is to send out those letters. If you remember from yesterday, we put that in the checklist for you. So that way you're covered starting at least by the 15th of October for the first jabs and then 26th of November for the remaining. Equally, we've also sent through the list of service providers and as copies of this previously, which we have covered off, just a reminder that under current equal opportunity laws, anti-vaccination is not considered a political belief or activity. It is not a protected characteristic under that particular definition of the Equal Opportunity Act. However, there are specific options around you if employees refuse to be vaccinated. We've run these over the last few months as well too. And if an employee refuses to be vaccinated, what is your obligation? Can you ask for evidence? The short answer is yes, but you've just got to have this in your policy documents to make sure that it's lawful and reasonable. We've also covered off whether an employee can refuse to attend the workplace if another co-worker isn't vaccinated, and also about the disciplinary actions that are available to you if an employee refuses to get vaccinated as well too. And I'll just run some commentary here just to say we are aware that there are a number of cases being brought before Supreme Courts and the likes, or magistrates courts around the country around the government's policy position. While we are watching that space, it seems likely that the courts are going to provide direction going back on existing exemptions that do apply, but essentially siding with the public health and wellbeing legislation. The other parts that we are seeing, which is included in the checklist, is to make sure that you continue with your attestation registers. This is something still that was issued by the Victorian State Government back in September last year. It hasn't been revoked around it. And the attestation documents, just to remind yourselves again, is essentially all on your Gemba dashboard that we have. And essentially these are covered under the daily assessment forms, which you can see here on the left-hand side, and you'll see them listed as the COVID-19 daily assessment form, and it gives you the tools to screen your staff and volunteers and clients even very, very quickly to make sure that they're safe from COVID symptoms. That said, our suggested recommendations are to follow these requirements. We are going to be circulating a whole lot of resources today as well too, to all of you as well. That will include these slides and also the policy documents as well too. And also we will look at getting out the checklists, those checklists by tomorrow morning as well. So as I've mentioned with it, if you do have any questions, by all means, reach out to us on the 1300 360 360 number, or you can email us at support@gemba360.com.